The sun was beginning its descent behind the towering pines, casting long shadows across the narrow, winding path. Nathan adjusted his backpack, taking a deep breath of the crisp forest air. Just as he was about to resume his pace, a bright streak in the sky caught his eye. It grew larger, closer, an incandescent orb racing toward the earth. Fascinated, Nathan watched as it disappeared behind a ridge with a distant, thunderous crash. He hesitated for only a moment before curiosity overcame him, and he hurried toward the impact site. As he approached, the smell of charred wood filled the air, and the ground vibrated underfoot. Through a clearing in the trees, he saw the wreckage of what was unmistakably not of this world. A craft of smooth, metallic surfaces and strange, pulsing lights, half buried in the earth. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Nathan called out cautiously as he stepped closer. The forest was eerily silent except for the hissing and crackling of cooling metal. From within the tangled debris, a weak voice responded, "Help, please." Nathan scrambled over the twisted metal, finding a panel that was ajar. Peering inside, he saw her, Lyra. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent quality, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Don't be afraid. I'm here to help," Nathan said, extending his hand. With considerable effort, Lyra moved to the edge of the opening. She took Nathan's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you," she managed in broken English, her accent unfamiliar. Once free from the wreckage, Lyra stumbled, weakened by the ordeal. Nathan quickly steadied her. "Can you walk?" he asked. Lyra nodded, and together they moved slowly away from the smoldering remains. As they reached a safer distance, Nathan pulled out his water bottle, offering it to her. Lyra looked at the bottle curiously before mimicking Nathan's actions and taking a cautious sip. "Where are you from?" Nathan asked, looking back at the ruined spacecraft. "Afar," Lyra replied, gazing at the sky as if she could see beyond the blue expanse into the depths of space. "Aurelia, it's not like this." "Sounds like you're a long way from home," Nathan said with a sympathetic frown. "What brought you here?" Lyra looked around, her expression pained. "Exploration turned to misfortune." Nathan nodded, understanding. "Well, you're safe now. Let's get you some help." He took out his phone, pausing as he considered the lack of service. "We need to get back to my town. It's a bit of a walk, but I'll guide you." As they walked, the initial shock wore off, and Lyra's curiosity began to surface. She asked about the trees, the wildlife, and the sky, which was beginning to darken with the onset of night. Nathan explained as best he could, pointing out different plants and explaining their uses. "Humans have always felt a connection with nature," he shared. "It's where many of us find peace and a sense of belonging." Lyra listened intently, her gaze absorbing every detail of the world around her. "Aurelia is different," she said. "We have cities that touch the sky, technology beyond your reach, but we sometimes forget the beauty of simplicity. Maybe there's a balance to be found," Nathan suggested, smiling. "You can teach us about your technology, and maybe we can share our appreciation for nature with you." Lyra smiled back, a spark of hope lighting her eyes. "I would like that," she said. Their conversation continued, the barriers of their worlds slowly dissolving as they shared stories and dreams. By the time they reached the outskirts of the town, Nathan and Lyra had formed an unlikely but profound bond. One forged from the chaos of a crash landing and strengthened by the simple acts of sharing and understanding. Chapter 2: Healing and Learning. The local hospital was a small building, just a few stories high, with an emergency room that rarely saw anything more severe than the occasional broken bone from hiking accidents. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of curiosity and concern as Nathan helped Lyra through the sliding doors. "Can someone help us here?" Nathan called out, supporting Lyra, who was still weak and disoriented from the crash. A nurse hurried over, her eyes widening slightly at Lyra's appearance. "What happened?" she asked as she guided them to a nearby examination room. "We need a doctor," Nathan explained. "She's been in an accident. It's a bit complicated." The nurse nodded, quickly checking Lyra's vitals. "I'll get Dr. Harris. He's our best in emergency care," she said before slipping out of the room. While they waited, Lyra looked around with evident curiosity. "Is this your healing place?" she asked, touching the cold, metal examination table. "Yes, it's a hospital. People come here when they're ill or injured," Nathan replied, helping her onto the table. Dr. Harris entered, a kindly middle-aged man with a gentle smile. "I hear we have a very unusual case," he said, glancing at Lyra. "I'm Dr. Harris. Can you tell me where you hurt?" Lyra pointed to her head and her side. As Dr. Harris conducted his examination, Nathan explained the situation in hushed tones. The doctor listened intently, nodding along without any sign of disbelief. "We'll take good care of her," he reassured Nathan. After ensuring that Lyra had no serious injuries, Dr. Harris prescribed some mild pain relievers and a sedative to help her rest. "She needs to stay overnight for observation," he told Nathan. "You can come back in the morning." As Nathan prepared to leave, Lyra grabbed his hand, her expression anxious. "Will you return?" she asked. "Of course, I'll be back first thing in the morning," Nathan promised, squeezing her hand reassuringly. The next day, Nathan was true to his word. He arrived early, carrying a bag of clothes for Lyra, not knowing exactly what would fit but having guessed the best he could. Lyra was sitting up in bed when he entered, looking much more herself. "You came back," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I told you I would," Nathan replied, handing her the bag. "I brought you some clothes. They might not be what you're used to, but they'll be more comfortable than the hospital gown." Lyra examined the clothes, her fingers tracing the fabrics curiously. "Thank you, Nathan. You are very kind to me," she said as she carefully changed into the clothes, which to Nathan's relief, fit reasonably well. Once she was dressed, Nathan helped her to the hospital's small garden, a quiet place filled with flowers and a few benches. They sat down, enjoying the morning sun. "So, what happens next for you, Lyra?" Nathan asked, looking over at her. "I am not sure. I need to contact my people, but I do not have the means from here," Lyra replied, looking thoughtful. Nathan considered this. "Maybe I can help. I know a few people who are good with technology. They might be able to figure something out with your ship's communication system." "That would be wonderful," Lyra said, her eyes lighting up. "I do not wish to impose more, but your help is invaluable." "It's no imposition. It's what friends do," Nathan said with a smile. As they talked more about Lyra's world and her people, Nathan felt a profound connection growing between them, an interstellar friendship built on shared kindness and curiosity. Together, they planned their next steps, each moment strengthening the bridge between two vastly different worlds. Chapter 3. A Glimpse into Humanity. After a week of recovery and adjusting to Earth, Lyra was starting to feel strong enough to venture out into the world beyond Nathan's home. He thought the best way to introduce her to humanity would be through something simple and honest, a community event at the local park. It was a charity festival, full of food stalls, live music, and families enjoying a warm afternoon under the sun. "This is where humans gather?" Lyra asked as Nathan parked his car and they stepped onto the grassy field. She looked around at the colorful tents and children running by, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Not all the time," Nathan said, chuckling. "This is a special event, but it's a good way to meet people and see what human culture looks like in a relaxed setting." Lyra followed Nathan as they wandered through the rows of stalls. She kept close to his side, unsure of how to interact with all the strangers. "What are they doing at those tables?" she asked, pointing to a group of volunteers handing out tickets. "They're selling raffle tickets," Nathan explained. "It's a game and people can win prizes. All the money they raise goes to help people who need it." Lyra tilted her head. "Why do you help people you do not know?" Nathan paused, considering his answer. "It's just what we do. When someone's struggling, others step in. It's part of being a community." As they approached a stall selling homemade crafts, an elderly man sitting behind the table waved to Nathan. "Hey there, Nate. It's been a while. Who's your friend?" "This is Lyra," Nathan said. She's new in town, just staying with me for a bit. The man smiled kindly. Welcome, Lyra. I hope you're enjoying yourself. This festival's one of the best parts of the year. Thank you, Lyra said shyly, still adjusting to all the human customs and greetings. They moved on, and Nathan noticed Lyra's gaze lingering on a small carousel where children rode painted wooden horses. Do you want to try it? He asked with a smile. What is it for? Lyra asked, her brow furrowed. It's just for fun, Nathan replied. Sometimes we don't do things for any practical reason. We do them because they make us happy. Lyra nodded slowly. I will try it. Nathan bought 2 tickets and they both climbed onto the carousel. As it started to turn, Lyra clung to the pole of her horse at first, unsure of the motion. But when she looked over at Nathan, who was grinning, she couldn't help but smile back. By the time the ride ended, she was laughing, her earlier caution forgotten. You're getting the hang of this whole fun thing, Nathan teased as they stepped off. I think I am, Lyra said, her face bright with amusement. It feels freeing. As the day wore on, they tried food from various stalls, with Nathan explaining the flavors and ingredients. Lyra was fascinated by the variety, and her reactions often made Nathan laugh. You're like a kid trying chocolate for the first time, he said after she took a bite of a sugary pastry and her eyes lit up. This is very different from what I know, Lyra said, savoring the treat. Your world is full of surprises. Later, they joined a group of festival-goers gathered around a small stage where a local band was performing. Lyra watched the musicians closely, her head bobbing slightly to the rhythm. Your people use music to communicate feelings, don't they? She asked. That's exactly right, Nathan said. Music can express things words can't. They stood side by side, listening to the music as the sun began to set. Lyra glanced at Nathan, her expression soft. Thank you for bringing me here. I did not realize how much there was to learn from your people. I think you're teaching me just as much, Nathan replied. They stayed until the festival wound down, watching as the lights dimmed and families began packing up. On the way back to Nathan's home, Lyra asked thoughtful questions about everything she had seen. Each answer Nathan gave seemed to draw her closer to understanding what made humans tick. By the time they arrived home, Nathan felt a sense of pride in how much Lyra had learned in just one day. As she sat on the porch looking up at the stars, Nathan joined her, handing her a cup of tea. You did great today, he said. You're fitting in better than I ever expected. Lyra sipped the tea, her gaze still on the sky. I'm starting to understand, she said. Being human is not just about survival. It's about connection, about finding joy in the small moments and sharing them with others. Nathan smiled, feeling that she was beginning to see humanity for what it truly was. And in turn, he was beginning to see her not just as an alien, but as someone who could truly become part of his world. Chapter 4. The First Connection. It was just before dusk when Nathan decided to take Lyra to the lake. It was one of his favorite places, secluded and calm, surrounded by towering pines, with the water reflecting the oranges and pinks of the sunset. He thought she might appreciate the tranquility after the busy festival. They walked the short trail in silence at first. Nathan noticed how her head tilted slightly as she listened to the chirping of the birds. You hear that? He asked. Those are the small winged creatures, Lyra said. What do you call them? Birds. They sing like that mostly in the morning and evening, Nathan explained. It's peaceful, isn't it? Lyra nodded. Yes, we have nothing like this. Our cities are always filled with noise, but not the natural kind. When they reached the lakeshore, Nathan spread out an old blanket he'd brought along and gestured for Lyra to sit. She lowered herself carefully, her hands brushing the fabric. This is a very beautiful place, she said softly. It's where I come to think, Nathan replied, sitting down beside her. When I need to figure something out or just clear my mind, this is where I go. Lyra looked out over the still water, her gaze thoughtful. Humans spend a great deal of time in reflection, don't they? We try to, Nathan said. I think it's how we grow. by looking back on what we've done and imagining what we could do better. They sat quietly for a few moments, listening to the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. Then Nathan glanced at Lyra, who was staring at her hands, her brow furrowed. "What's on your mind?" he asked. "I've been trying to understand something," she said, meeting his eyes. Earlier, at the festival, there were people laughing, children playing, and friends greeting one another with such warmth. I could feel something. I don't know how to describe it. "That sounds like happiness," Nathan said, smiling. "It's what happens when people care about each other, when they share moments, big or small, that make life feel worth living." Lyra hesitated, her expression uncertain. "I think I've never felt that before." Nathan frowned. "Never. Our culture is different," she said. "We value knowledge, efficiency, and progress. Emotional connections are considered secondary. Weaknesses. I don't think caring about someone makes you weak," Nathan replied. "If anything, it makes you stronger. It gives you something to fight for, someone to stand beside." Lyra was quiet, her gaze returning to the water. The fading light cast a soft glow over her face, and Nathan couldn't help but think about how far they'd come in just a short time. He reached over and gently placed his hand on hers. "It's okay to feel things, to care. You don't have to hold back." She looked down at their hands, then back at him. "This is new to me," she admitted. "Your kindness, your willingness to share your world with me. I don't understand why you do it." "Because you needed help," Nathan said simply. "And because you're worth it." Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, hesitantly, she leaned toward him, her hand shifting slightly to grasp his. The movement was tentative, unsure. Nathan's breath caught, but he stayed still, letting her decide. When her lips brushed his, it was gentle, barely there. A question more than a statement. Nathan closed his eyes and answered her with equal softness, his hand tightening around hers as their connection deepened. For the first time, Lyra felt not just welcome, but truly understood. They pulled back slowly, and Lyra's expression was a mix of wonder and vulnerability. "I never thought I could feel this way," Nathan smiled. "There's a lot about humanity you've still got to learn, but you're off to a pretty good start." Lyra returned his smile, her grip on his hand steady now. The silence that followed was warm, comforting. No longer the stillness of strangers, but the quiet of two people sharing something rare and genuine. As the stars began to peek through the darkening sky, they remained by the lake, closer now than they had been before, their shared moment lingering between them like the fading light on the water. Chapter 5: Challenges Arise. Lyra stepped out onto the small balcony of Nathan's apartment, drawn by the faint sounds of the bustling town below. Since her arrival, she'd become accustomed to the flow of life here. The early morning trucks rumbling past, neighbors calling out greetings, children laughing as they ran along the sidewalks. It was all so different from the sterile, orderly existence she'd known before. "Nate, do you think your people will ever fully accept me?" she asked as Nathan joined her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He passed her one and leaned on the railing. "Why wouldn't they?" he said, taking a sip. "You've been good to everyone you've met. Heck, Mrs. Martinez down the hall already thinks you're a saint for helping her carry those groceries." Lyra smiled softly. "Some people still look at me, strangely, as if I don't belong here." "That'll fade," Nathan said confidently. "They just need time." She took a sip of the coffee and winced at the bitterness. "Humans drink this to wake themselves? It grows on you," Nathan chuckled, watching her reaction. Their peaceful moment didn't last long. From below, voices rose sharply, angry, unfamiliar. Nathan frowned and set his mug down. "Stay here," he told Lyra, heading toward the front door. "Wait, what's happening?" she asked, following him inside. "I don't know, but I'll check it out," he said, grabbing his jacket. Lyra wasn't content to stay behind, though. By the time Nathan reached the street, she was right behind him, and he didn't argue. The commotion turned out to be a group of strangers gathered near the corner store. They were talking loudly, their tone suspicious. Lyra recognized a few faces from her previous trips into town, but others were unfamiliar. "Why should we let her stay?" one man was saying. "We don't even know what she is, or why she's here." "Hey, what's going on?" Nathan interrupted, stepping closer. The group turned to him, a mixture of guilt and defiance on their faces. One of the townsfolk, a middle-aged man named Harris who ran the hardware store, stepped forward. "Nathan," he said, his voice low, "some folks are just uneasy about Lyra. They think it might not be safe having her here." Lyra looked directly at the group, her expression calm but determined. "I mean no harm to any of you," she said evenly. "I am here only because my ship crashed, and Nathan was kind enough to help me. I wish only to learn about your world and live peacefully among you." "That's easy for you to say," another voice muttered, and a few others murmured in agreement. "Enough," Nathan said firmly, holding up his hands. "She hasn't done anything to deserve this suspicion. You've all seen her around town. She's helped Mrs. Martinez. She's been polite to everyone. What's the problem here?" "It's not about what she's done," Harris said carefully. "It's about what might happen. We don't know her, Nathan. She's not one of us." Lyra stepped closer, her voice steady. "How can I become one of you if you do not allow me the chance? I want to be part of your community, to contribute, not to harm. What can I do to prove myself?" The group exchanged glances, their expressions softening slightly. It was clear that her words had an impact, even if their suspicions didn't fade completely. "I don't know if there's anything you can do right now," Harris admitted. "But if you're serious about being part." "She's already done more than enough to prove that," Nathan said. "She doesn't have to earn your trust. She deserves it just like anyone else." The group gradually dispersed, some still looking wary, others thoughtful. Nathan let out a sigh and turned to Lyra. "I'm sorry about that. People can be stubborn." "It's all right," Lyra said quietly. "I expected this would happen sooner or later. I will simply continue as I have, and perhaps they will come to accept me in time." Nathan looked at her, admiring her calm approach. "You're handling this a lot better than I would." "It is not my way to respond with anger," she said. "If I remain patient, I believe they will see that I mean no harm. Still, if anyone gives you a hard time, let me know," Nathan said. "We'll face it together." Lyra smiled at him. "Thank you, Nathan. I'm glad I don't have to face it alone." Back at the apartment, they settled into a quiet evening. As they sat on the couch, the earlier tension faded. Lyra glanced at Nathan, her expression thoughtful. "You spoke for me earlier, defended me. I am not used to someone doing that." "Get used to it," Nathan said with a grin. "You're part of my life now, and I'll always have your back." Lyra smiled, leaning against him. "You're a good man, Nathan. I hope one day I can do the same for you." "You already have," Nathan said, "just by being here." Chapter 6. Exploring the World. Nathan's old pickup rattled down the winding road, its cab filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the quiet hum of a classic rock station. Lyra sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the rolling countryside outside the window. For a while, she simply watched the trees flash by, her expression thoughtful. "This is very different from the town," she finally said. "It feels open." "That's the point," Nathan replied with a grin. "I figured it'd be good for you to see more of the world than just my little corner of it. There's a lot out there." Lyra turned to look at him, her brow furrowed. "It's still strange to me how you travel such distances without, assistance. No automated systems, no aerial transit. Just these vehicles." "Sometimes the simplest way is the best way," Nathan said, tapping the steering wheel. "It's not about getting there as fast as possible. It's about enjoying the ride." She leaned back in her seat, letting the hum of the engine fill the silence between them. "I think I understand what you mean. Back home, everything was about efficiency. We never considered that the journey could be just as important as the destination." Nathan chuckled. "Well, you're catching on fast. And trust me, the view is worth it. They drove for hours, the scenery shifting from wooded hills to vast, golden plains. Nathan pointed out landmarks along the way. A crumbling old barn, a windmill creaking in the breeze, a lone tree standing defiant in an empty field. Lyra listened intently, occasionally asking questions about the people who had once lived and worked there. When they finally pulled off the main road, the landscape had changed entirely. Before them stretched a sparkling lake, surrounded by rocky cliffs and dense forest. Nathan parked the truck and grabbed his backpack, motioning for Lyra to follow. "This," he said, gesturing to the water and the towering trees, "is one of my favorite spots in the world." Lyra stepped closer to the edge of the lake, her expression softening. "It's beautiful." Nathan set down his pack and pulled out a small blanket and a thermos. "I thought we could have a little picnic," he said. "There's a trail that goes up to the cliffs if you feel like hiking, but we can just hang out here for a while, too." Lyra crouched by the water's edge, letting her fingers skim the surface. "Your world is full of places like this?" "Well, not exactly like this, but yeah, there's a lot of beauty out there," Nathan said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "You just have to know where to look." She took the offered cup and sat down on the blanket. "It's peaceful here. I can see why you like it." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun glint off the water. Eventually, Nathan spoke up. "Lyra, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What was it like back home, before all of this?" He gestured vaguely, indicating her crash, their meeting, and everything that had come since. Lyra's expression grew distant. "It was structured," she said after a pause. "Orderly. We valued progress, knowledge, and innovation above all else. Emotions were considered secondary. Personal connections, too. Everything was directed toward advancement." "That sounds intense," Nathan said. "It was," Lyra admitted. "But I didn't realize how much I was missing until I came here. Seeing the way you live, the way you care for each other, it's made me question what we gave up in pursuit of perfection." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes, imperfections are what make life worth living." They talked long into the afternoon, their conversation touching on everything from Lyra's homeworld to Nathan's childhood memories of fishing at the lake with his grandfather. The more they shared, the more their bond deepened. When the sun dipped low, Nathan stood and offered Lyra his hand. "What do you say we check out that trail? The view from the cliffs is incredible." Lyra smiled and took his hand. "Lead the way." The hike was steep in places, but Nathan kept a steady pace, pointing out interesting plants and geological features as they went. Lyra's curiosity never wavered. She stopped often to examine a flower or a cluster of moss, asking questions about the ecosystem and how humans had come to understand it. When they reached the top, the sight took Lyra's breath away. The lake spread out below them, the surrounding hills bathed in golden light. The horizon seemed endless, and for a moment, all Lyra could do was stand there, taking it all in. "It's amazing," she whispered. "I've never seen anything like it." Nathan smiled, his hands resting on his hips as he took in the view. "I'm glad you like it. I wanted to share it with you." Lyra turned to him, her eyes bright. "You've shared so much with me, Nathan. More than I ever expected." "Thank you." "Hey, that's what friends do," he said lightly, though his gaze lingered on hers a moment longer. "You ready to head back?" She nodded, but before they started down the trail, Lyra reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "You've shown me so much of your world. I hope one day I can show you mine." Nathan smiled. "I'd like that." They made their way back to the truck as the first stars began to appear in the sky. Neither of them spoke much on the ride home, content to let the day's memories settle. Nathan glanced over at Lyra once or twice, seeing a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. She was changing, he realized, and maybe so was he. Chapter 7: Acceptance and Sacrifice. The town's main square was buzzing with an energy Nathan hadn't seen in years. Tables lined the cobblestone streets, laden with baked goods, handmade crafts, and produce from local farms. A small stage was set up near the fountain, and the sound of a guitar strumming carried through the crisp autumn air. Nathan had brought Lyra along, thinking this community fair would help her connect with more of the townsfolk. But as they walked through the crowded square, it was clear that not everyone had warmed to the idea of an alien in their midst. Some people avoided eye contact or whispered behind her back. A few even shot her openly wary looks. Lyra noticed, of course, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she focused on the booths, asking Nathan questions about the various items on display. She showed particular interest in a table full of colorful quilts, running her fingers lightly over the intricate patterns. "These are beautiful," she said softly. "Did you make them yourself?" she asked the elderly woman behind the table. The woman hesitated for a moment, glancing at Nathan before finally smiling. "Yes, dear. All by hand." Lyra nodded appreciatively. "You have great skill. This work is warm, comfortable." The woman's smile softened, and she looked at Lyra more closely. "Thank you, sweetheart. I put a lot of love into these quilts." Nathan gave Lyra a subtle nod, and they moved on. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As they approached the center of the square, the crowd grew thicker, and Nathan overheard snippets of conversation that made him pause. "The generator's busted. Without it, the clinic's out of luck. We can't keep power going long enough for the surgery equipment." Nathan frowned, turning to Lyra. "The clinic's generator broke down. That's bad. The town depends on it for more than just the clinic. It powers the food pantry's refrigerators, the community center's heating in the winter." Lyra tilted her head. "Why not simply repair it?" "That's the problem," Nathan said. "The generator's old, and the parts it needs aren't easy to find. We've been patching it together for years, but it finally gave out. Even if they ordered parts now, it could take weeks to get here." Lyra looked thoughtful. "I might be able to help." "How?" Nathan asked, his brow furrowed. "My ship's systems, what's left of them, could provide components. Not a permanent fix, but perhaps enough to keep it running until proper parts arrive." Nathan hesitated. "You're sure? That ship's the only thing connecting you to your home." Lyra smiled faintly. "I've been learning from you, Nathan. Sometimes, you do what you can for others, even if it costs you something." He felt a swell of pride at her words. "Let's do it." They drove out to the crash site that afternoon. The area had been cordoned off by a few government agents who were still poking around the wreckage, but Nathan had come to know the local authorities well enough to talk his way past them. Inside the broken hull of her ship, Lyra moved with purpose. She pulled open access panels, removed gleaming components that hummed faintly with alien energy, and handed them to Nathan, explaining their functions as she went. "These power cells," she said, holding up a smooth, translucent block, "should provide the necessary energy output for your generator. And these circuit modules?" She paused, looking at him. "Do you trust me to handle this?" Nathan nodded. "I do. Let's get them back to the clinic." By the time they returned, the sun was setting. A small group had gathered outside the clinic, including Dr. Harris and a few of the town's engineers. At first, there were some skeptical murmurs as Lyra began explaining how the components worked and how to integrate them. But when she started connecting the pieces, her movements precise and confident, the murmurs stopped. Dr. Harris stepped closer, watching intently. "You really think this will work?" "I know it will," Lyra replied calmly. "I only need someone to follow my instructions and ensure the wiring aligns correctly." One of the engineers stepped forward. "I'll help." Together, they worked into the night. Nathan stayed by Lyra's side, handing her tools and holding a flashlight. The crowd grew quiet as they watched, the tension in the air gradually easing with each successful step. Finally, with a soft hum, the generator powered on. The lights in the clinic flickered, then brightened. A wave of relieved cheers swept through the crowd. Lyra turned to Nathan, a small but genuine smile on her face. "It's working." "You did it," Nathan said, clapping her on the shoulder. "We did it." Dr. Harris approached her, his expression one of gratitude. "You just saved us a lot of trouble, and more importantly, you probably saved lives. Thank you." The rest of the crowd echoed his thanks, some people even stepping forward to shake Lyra's hand. The wariness she had sensed before seemed to melt away in that moment. She had shown them not just her capability, but her willingness to help, to give something of herself for their benefit. That night, as they walked back to Nathan's truck, he looked over at Lyra. "You're going to have to get used to people calling you a hero." "I did what needed to be done," Lyra said modestly. "And that's exactly why they'll respect you," Nathan replied. "You're one of us now." Lyra glanced at him, her expression warm. "One of you. I like the sound of that." Chapter 8, Choosing Family. The quiet hum of the town seemed distant as Nathan and Lyra sat on his apartment's balcony. The early evening breeze played gently through the wind chimes hanging above, filling the space between their words. It was the first moment of calm they'd had in weeks, but that peace carried an edge of uncertainty. "They'll come for me soon," Lyra said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "My people. They'll have tracked the ship by now. It's only a matter of time." Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What will you do?" he asked, though he feared the answer. He had known all along this day might come, but now that it was here, the idea of letting her go was unbearable. She was silent for a long time. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've learned so much from you, from all of this, but my home is out there. If they come, I have a duty to return." Nathan swallowed hard. "Lyra, you don't have to go just because they show up. You can make your own choice. And if I choose to stay, I may never see my people again," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Everything I've ever known, my family, my culture, would be out of reach. And if you go," Nathan countered, "you'll be giving up everything you've found here, the friends you've made, the life you've started to build." Lyra turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "Do you think this is my life now? Your world, these people? You?" Nathan hesitated. "I think it could be, if that's what you want." Her expression softened, a small smile playing on her lips. "You humans are so strange. You don't just accept what is, you make your own paths, your own families." Nathan reached out, resting a hand over hers. "That's what you've become to me, Lyra. Family. And family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about the people you choose. The ones who choose you." For a moment, her gaze dropped to their joined hands. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. "You would have me stay, even if it means I never return to my own people?" "I don't want you to go," Nathan said honestly. "But I don't want you to feel trapped here either. You deserve to make the choice that feels right for you. I just hope," he trailed off, struggling to find the words, "I hope you choose me." Lyra studied him, her face unreadable. Then she took a deep breath and stood, pulling him to his feet with her. "Show me something." "Show you what?" he asked, a bit thrown by the sudden change in tone. "Something beautiful. Something that would make me want to stay," she said. Nathan thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I know just the place." They drove out to the cliffs where they'd hiked weeks before. This time they arrived just before sunset. The golden light bathed the landscape, casting long shadows over the rocks and trees. The lake below glimmered like molten glass, and the sky above was streaked with fiery orange and soft lavender hues. Lyra stepped to the edge of the cliff and stared out at the view. Nathan stood beside her, watching her reaction. "This is what I wanted you to see," he said quietly. "No matter how many times I come here, it never stops taking my breath away." Lyra didn't answer right away. She simply stood there, letting the wind whip through her hair, her hands resting lightly on the stone. When she finally turned to him, her expression was one of quiet resolve. "You've shown me so much, Nathan," she said. "Not just places like this, but what it means to live, to feel, to love." Nathan's heart thudded in his chest. "And I don't want to lose that," she said. "I don't want to lose you." He felt a wave of relief, but he kept his voice steady. "Then don't. Stay. Build a life here. We'll figure it out together." Lyra smiled, the kind of smile that lit up her whole face. "I choose this," she said simply. "I choose you." Nathan reached for her hand, and she let him take it. Together, they stood on the edge of the world, looking out at the vast expanse before them, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side.